All right, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. You need an incident response plan now and other things you need even before CMMC is passed. We're going to wait just a couple minutes here to have everybody join the call, and then we'll get rolling. All right. Right now we see some people rolling in. All right, let's get rolling here. Okay, so if you were looking for, you need an incident response plan now and other things you need even before CMMC is passed, well, you've come to the right place. What are we going to cover today? So today, we're going to talk about a simple breakdown of the security that the government expects you to have implemented now. Also, some easy ways of implementing that security that aren't going to break your bank. We're also going to talk about a shortcut to the incident response plan that you need and the reporting requirement. And also easy security controls that you can put in place right now, and maybe that you already have. And also your free incident response plan direct from the CMMC IT documentation toolkit. But before we dive too deep into this, you're probably wondering, who is this girl? Who's Leah Capri Shilabad? Well, I am a cybersecurity professional. I founded Intech Solutions as a security-focused MSP in 2006. It turns out that a lot of the clients that we had to work with needed to have extra security requirements in place because they worked on federal contracts with DoD. So we had to learn all about CMMC and NIST 800-171 and how to implement this really well for all of our clients. Since we did that, we created the CMMC IT documentation toolkit, which is basically a how to implement CMMC in an organization. We are a CMMC RPO, certified CMMC professional, CCP candidate, and I'm also a certified information security manager. I wrote Cyber Warfare a couple of years ago, which is available on Amazon, and recently released last year the movie Cybercrime: The Dark Web Uncovered, which you can also find on Amazon. So a quick disclaimer. You're going to get a copy of the incident response plan directly from the CMMC IT documentation toolkit. Now, this is actively what we are using for all of our CMMC clients. It's really important for you to understand, though, that you cannot just put your company's logo on the cover page of this document and then find and replace and then put your company name in there. In fact, you really can't do that with any template when it comes to documentation, especially for CMMC or anywhere in these requirements. It really you have to know these documents really well. They have to be functional and in use in your organization. And of course, never, ever, ever test an IRP on a real incident. Make sure that you're testing plans and tabletop exercises instead. All right. So one of the first things people ask is, does this really apply to me? Well, if you have a federal contract, then what we're going to talk about today applies to you. Or if you're a subcontractor on a federal contract and have access to federal contract information, then this applies to you. And if you're either one of these things, you're in the right place. And we're going to dive into what you need to know right now. And you know what? We're not even going to talk about CMMC. There's so much talk right now about, oh, well, will CMMC actually happen? And oh, it has been delayed. And all of this controversy around CMMC. But you know, we don't have to talk about CMMC to talk about requirements that are in contracts right now. What kind of requirements? Well, first is the FAR clause, 52.204-21. Basic safeguarding of covered contractor information systems. The other one is a DFARS clause, 52.204-7012, safeguarding covered defense information, and cyber incident reporting. So let's break these two down and really understand what's in them and who do they apply to. All right, so first, the FAR 52-204-21 clause. Who does that apply to? All federal contracts. So this is not just DoD, any federal contract that at all, or if you're a contractor who has information that's considered federal contract, you are responsible for implementing the following security controls. I'm not going to have to read through all of them with you, but we have a total of 15. Here are the rest of those 15. Some of them look pretty familiar. Why is that? So anyone engaged in any federal contract is responsible for protecting federal contract information, FCI, even if you don't have CUI. Those requirements we just reviewed are straight out of NIST 800-171. If you go through and you say, those sound really familiar, that's because they are. They are these 15 controls. In fact, this one right here, in the FAR, it doesn't specifically say CUI, but it does talk about protecting CUI and assuring that it was not getting onto publicly accessible sites. Holy cow. You know what that looks like? What does the FAR, the 52, all of these things right here, they look a lot like CMMC level 1. I know, I said I wasn't going to talk about CMMC. Apparently I lied. The important thing here though, is to realize that already, like, some people really feel that this CMMC thing is something new, that it's something that we don't have to do yet. But currently, any organization that has a federal contract, it does not matter if it's with DoD, it could be Department of Energy, it could be Department of Human Services. It doesn't matter what department it is. If you have a federal contract, you are technically and very explicitly required to be implementing the same things in CMMC level 1, these controls. Gasp. So we're mostly today talking about federal contracts. So if we're going to look at federal contracts and the requirements here, let's dive into the DFARS. The current clause that is in every single contract with that is from DoD is the DFARS 52-204-7012 clause, which most of us just lovingly refer to as the 7012 clause, because the rest of it is very long to say. And that's safeguarding covered defense information and cyber incident reporting. So let's break that down. The first thing it says you have to do is implement adequate security. And of course, the government's not going to leave that up to our interpretation. They're going to tell us what adequate security means. What's adequate security? So first they say that they have to provide adequate security on all covered contractor information systems. And what adequate security is the following. First, that you need to implement the NIST 800-171 controls. And not only do you need to implement them, but the expectation is that they are implemented and in effect at the time the solicitation is issued or as authorized by the contracting officer. So in the past, when they were first coming out with these controls, back in 2016 and 2017, they did give everyone a deadline of December 31st, 2017 to implement these controls. Since we're past that point right now, the government expects that if you are going to try to bid on a contract or go to contract renewal, that NIST 800-171 should already be implemented. So let's go into this a little bit more. The government believes that adequate security is the implementation of the 800-171 controls. And do you know what else? They also feel that the implementation of the 800-171 controls is and actually releasing the original burden that they felt they were putting on contractors. Did you know that back in 2013, they were going to require you to implement the 800-53 controls? So that is the security for federal systems. They wanted the rest of the defense industrial base to implement that. And that has many, many, many more controls. In fact, they say that there was a 30% reduction in burden by creating the 800-171 controls that were derived from 800-53. So they felt like they did everybody a really big favor by saying you only have to implement 800-171 and the 110 controls in there. This is currently in all contracts. So if you accepted a contract with the DFARS 7012 clause and you stated that you've implemented 800-171, and you say, well, I got my contract and I'm just not done yet. So how did I get this contract? That's really interesting, because if you listen to officials with the DoD and the private industry, that conversation back and forth about, well, this is too much of a burden. Aren't you going to give us help? And they say things like, oh, well, you've had all of this time, and oh, it's not that big of a burden. And if they keep getting pressed, if DoD officials keep getting pressed, they fall back on the argument time and again, well, CMMC should not be a heavy lift or a heavy burden, because you were already supposed to have implemented 800-171. So this shouldn't be a big deal. Now, they already know that 90% of the DIB has not implemented 800-171. They know that. So they're really talking out of both sides of their mouth there. But this is part of the reason that many get frustrated, because they're asking for help and guidance from DoD for assistance with being able to pay for this. And this is the kind of thing that we're getting back. Now, remember that we are supposed to be able to, that implementing adequate security does add to overhead, and that there should be a way to be able to make this up inside of bidding and contracts so that you can account for some of the added cost with implementing this. There's a lot of debate on how to do that. And in the past, it was not even a question for most contractors, because they felt, well, if we actually try to work this into our bids, we're not going to be competitive, and we're not going to be able to, win these contracts. As time has gone on, and especially as we've been seeing a lot of pressure from primes to require at least a minimum SPRS score in order to have contract award, or in some cases, even to be able to bid on a contract, we're finding that this is really leveling the playing field for contractors. So those that are implementing now should be able to increase their the bid and be able to make up some of the costs associated with the implementation of adequate security. So what else do we need to do? We also need to make sure that we're looking at cloud service providers. So this is the verbiage that comes direct from the 7012 clause. If you're going to use an external service provider to store, process, or transmit any covered defense information, then they must be Federal Risk Management Program Moderate baseline, FedRAMP Moderate. And they also need to comply with cyber incident reporting, making sure that they are scanning for and sampling malicious software, preserving media, and protecting it. So what does it actually mean? So if you use an external cloud service provider for processing, storing, or transmitting covered defense information, CDI, then they have to have implemented FedRAMP Moderate baseline controls. It does not say that they have to have an ATO or an authorization to say that they actually have implemented them from an official. It does mean, though, that they have to at least attest to having implemented these controls. A CSP is going to be any external company that processes, stores, or transmit information. So it could be a company like AWS or like Microsoft, and it could be, your ERP vendor. And just because your ERP vendor is storing the information on Microsoft's GovCloud does not mean that they don't have to do anything. They still have to assure that everything that they are doing inside of their ERP also matches these FedRAMP moderate baseline controls. Why is that? Well, because the government wants to assure that a CSP is protecting the information that you're a data custodian of, because now you've transferred the risk of storing, processing, or transmitting that information to that third party. And so they're trying to increase the net, because they understand that if they're gonna release data into the industrial base, that we have to make sure that we have an understanding of how it's going to be protected as it travels around, as it's stored, and as it's being processed. Okay. So what else do you need to do? You also have cybersecurity reporting requirements. So it states in 7012 that when you discover a cyber incident that affects a covered contractor information system or the covered defense information residing therein, the CDI, then you have certain requirements. You shall conduct a review for evidence of compromise, report the cyber incidents, assure that you have a medium assurance certificate, submit the malicious software to DoD's Cyber Crime Center, the DC3, and preserve and protect images of all known affected systems for at least 90 days, and provide the DoD with access to additional information or equipment that's necessary to conduct a forensic analysis. So what does that mean? That means that you really need to get a medium assurance certificate from an identity provider like IdenTrust, if you don't have one already, and you need to get it now. If you don't already have this, then make sure that you go to IdenTrust as soon as possible and start to get your medium assurance certificate, your ECA cert. It's a real pain in the butt to get one, and it takes a long time. And then it also means if you have a cyber incident, so some kind of compromise, and that it may have affected CDI or systems containing CDI, then you need to report the incident on the DIBnet portal. So, and to think about this, responding to incidents that may have affected CDI or systems containing CDI, you first need to get very clear about what the system is that contains CDI, or the system that contains CDI, or the CDI itself. So if you don't know those two things, you may be over-reporting. Like, let's say, for instance, that your organization does not allow any kind of CDI to be sent via email. So email never has covered defense information in it at all. If your email is compromised, and you are able to do, through your analysis, see that it was just a singular email account that was compromised, and that you have verified that there's nothing else that malicious actor was able to do on any other system, and it's not possible for them to have, from that one compromise, leverage themselves into any other system, then it would not be a reportable event to the DIBnet. So that's why it's really important that you have clarity on the systems that are in scope for this protection. You also have to be prepared to respond to that incident, including having a written incident response plan, which is one of the reasons why we have that available today. You need to investigate that compromise, document all the actions you've taken, and if you can, preserve a copy of the malicious software to upload to the DC3. You want to take an image of the affected systems and store them for at least 90 days in the case that DoD would like to come in and check it out. And what's really important to remember is that the DoD can show up and take your physical media at any time for forensics. So you need to have, as part of your IR plan or your DR plan, incident response or disaster recovery, a plan to include what you're going to do if they took your servers or computers. And what people say, well, does that really happen? Oh, it absolutely 100% happens. We've seen situations in the past where they will just show up, unplug devices, and say, we're taking this with us. If it has their data on it, they contractually are allowed to do that. What would happen if they walked into your business and unplugged computers or servers and then just took them? Don't ever think that you're going to get those back ever again. But if you do, it would be a long time. So this has to be part of both of your plans, and you have to be thinking about this in advance, not after they show up and take it, and not hope and pray for 90 days. So let's think about the incident response plan. So the incident response plan that we're going to be talking about today, and what yours should certainly have, is one that meets that DFARS requirement and that explains the things that you have to do, such as the incident reporting. Also, make sure that you are defining the different kinds of incidents, so you're really clear on what is an incident in your organization, what is reportable, and what is just simply an event that occurs. We also included starter procedures to follow in the event of different incidents, so that you don't have to stare at a blank page, because I think it's a lot easier. Get your brain in the flow. And you get a copy just for attending today. So good job. Really quick, 3 quick things about incident response. The first is to make sure that you keep an offline copy of your IRP. That's important because if a system is compromised, it's possible that you're not going to have access to that system. So always have something printed out on a shelf somewhere that you can just pull off and follow at that time. Oh, also make sure that you have a list of everyone on your incident response team inside of that plan. That might be your MSP or some people in your IT department, executive management, maybe somebody in an HR role or in a marketing role who would do some of the damage control of interfacing with the public after an incident. And certainly you want to have your contact for legal on there, as well as your insurance provider. And why? Well, we're going to talk about that actually in just a minute. But you also want to ensure that you keep your cyber liability insurance limits information off of accessible systems. One of the things that malicious actors will do when they gain access to a system is look to see what the liability insurance limits are, so they know how much to demand if they decide to ransom something or steal information and hold it hostage and demand money to get it back, or they will release it publicly. So why do you want to make sure that your insurance company is on that IRP? Well, first, after you alerted IT that there is an incident, or maybe they've alerted you, the next call is to the insurance company. Because if you take actions and you think that you're doing a good thing, and you think that you are taking the right action to be able to stop that malicious software and save your company, it's possible that you'll take actions that will actually void your insurance policy. And that after you've taken certain actions, they'll no longer pay, because they want their forensics team to be involved and be able to take that kind of action. This is also another place that you may not have access to your systems. We have also seen times where there was a massive ransomware incident. The insurance company was called, and their forensics teams did not allow the company to access the systems for several days. In this case, what will your company do while they're going through and doing their forensic research? It's really important to be able to have some kind of a backup, not just a backup of your data, but backup systems or some kind of plan to have continuity if this happens to you. So remember again that you need to schedule internal tabletops to test this plan, and then give yourself a deadline to write your IRP so that it gets done. And never test on a real live incident. Please don't do that. Another question that I get is, well, isn't there some kind of thing I can do with the variance? Because, I remember seeing that somewhere that we could just ask the DoD if we don't really have to do all of this. Well, yes, there are some things known as variances. So it does say in the 7012 clause, and also it does say in other clauses as well, it references this thing called variances. If you would like to, you can submit a request to vary from the 800-171 controls in writing. You would do that to the contract officer and also submit it to the DoD CIO. And if the DoD CIO approves it and you have that in writing, either to make it a non-applicable or to have an alternative but equally effective security measure, then that would be approved and you would be able to go to your assessment with that approval from DoD CIO. But here's a couple of things for you to think about. Oh, well, first you have to notify the prime after that's done. But the first thing is that the DoD CIO does not hand out variances like candy. So it's not like, oh, this is going to be too hard for us to implement. Let's just ask the DoD CIO, oh, sure, you don't have to implement that. That's not exactly how it works. It has to be justified. So you have to be able to show that we cannot actually implement this control because the equipment is too old, or that it would be such a heavy burden for us to be able to produce this, that we would just say no to the contract, and the DoD CIO says, well, we need this, so we'll allow you to have an alternative but equally effective security measure. So in the end, it's not that you get to be less secure, it's that they might allow you to have a different security measure in place. But so important, you don't get to choose that. The DoD CIO, in the end, are the ones that decide. All right. So what do you do now? So first, we do have 2 upcoming webinars that you can be a part of. Both are joint webinars with our insurance provider, Duncan Financial, who will be talking about the 5 questions that you must ask to assure that you're covered when you're hacked. And the second is the 7 vital steps to do after getting hacked. We talked about a couple of them today, but it's really important to assure that if you are purchasing cyber liability insurance, that you really understand what's in your policy and you know what you're buying, so that if something happens, you know if you're going to be made whole or not, and what to do and not to do to make sure that it covers you. That will be on the 8th of next month and the 22nd. So please look for the emails to get registered for those. Also, you can learn more about the CMMC IT Documentation Toolkit and get help implementing NIST 800-171 controls by going to our website, intechit.net/CMMC, or emailing info@intechit.net, and we'll get you the information and help that you need. Also, don't forget to link with me on LinkedIn. I'm at /Princess Leia. And you can link with me on Signal, Leia Caprice Shilabad, and that's where you'll find me. So just checking to see if we have any questions. All right, so there's a little confusion about level 1 versus level 2 and what you have to implement right now. Okay, and okay, so just to clarify again, if you have any kind of federal contract information in your environment, then you're required to implement those 15 controls that we mentioned before. You can find all of those listed inside of the DFARS. And then also you'll get a copy of the slides, so you could even go back and then review that in the 800-171 document, because I listed actually in order I copied and pasted directly from the FARS document, and those 15 controls. And then I listed in order which one of them was which NIST 800-171 control and which CMMC level 1 control. So you can take those slides and then look into those 2 documents, actually 3 documents, to get the detailed information. And that's if you have FCI. And if you have CUI, then right now you need to have implemented 800-171's 110 controls. Now, if you say, well, we're putting all of our CUI into this enclave over here, so that's the only system that needs any kind of protection, actually, you're still responsible for protecting FCI. So it's possible, and this is something you should think about, and that's why we always start with understanding data flow first. You could have FCI on other systems outside of your enclave and still have a requirement to make sure that you're implementing those controls. Now, if you read through them, they are, this is like basic stuff, right? That's why, let me see if I can go back here. Yeah, this is basic stuff. This is just best practices. There's nothing crazy here, right? So making sure that you just have authorized users on the system, limiting connections to external information systems, making sure that you're not posting FCI on publicly accessible systems, making sure that people have to authenticate properly to the system and anyone can't just log on, sanitizing information systems, limiting physical access to equipment, like locking things down in a server room, making sure that you have audit logs of access, like the logbook, escorting visitors, implementing subnetworks or VLANs on a network, identifying system flaws, things like patching, and updating firmware on your firewalls, making sure that you have antivirus installed, and doing scans. All of those kinds of things are really just like everyone should be doing this, not just people who have federal contract information, clearly. But you have to be making sure that you've done that due diligence of looking at that on all systems, even if they have FCI on them and not even CUI. That was a good question. It can get confusing. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, just look for the email update where we'll give you a link to the recording as well as your free IRP, and also look out for the emails to register for our 2 new upcoming webinars, and stay secure out there.